Networking is one of the most important concepts which every cloud provider looks out for when deploying their services. Now, what are those key services that have to do with networking as far as Amazon Web Services is concerned? And this is one of the key questions which they'll always ask during DevOps interviews or during cloud computing interviews. Or well, if you already started looking forward to getting to know more about networking on the AWS cloud, well, this video is for you. Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. So in this video, I'm focusing on the key networking services available on the Amazon Web Services Cloud, on the AWS cloud. You want to watch this video to the end because I'll be sharing with you those services that will help you give a good conversation as far as your experience with networking services on Amazon is concerned. Now, the very first service which we are mentioning, or which I'm mentioning on AWS networking, is the AWS Virtual Private Clouds. So the AWS VPCs, or the virtual private clouds, enable you to create cloud environments or to create your own virtual cloud environments on the AWS cloud. And as far as virtual private clouds are concerned, we have a lot of services on AWS that can interact together with your virtual private clouds. That is to say, you can build subunits of your virtual cloud using what we call subnets. Now, for subnets, subnets are like smaller partitions of your bigger network, or smaller networks of your main private cloud which you have. So we can have subnets that are accessible to the internet, which we call public subnets, as well as subnets that are not accessible to anyone from the internet, which we call the private subnets. So you can have private subnets and public subnets on your AWS environment. On AWS, we also have a service called Internet Gateways, which act actually as a firewall that helps you to have access to internet resources. So the internet gateway is what you add to a subnet to make it a public subnet. And well, for resources that are hosted in your public subnet and you want your users to have access to some of these resources, you now want to expose these resources to the internet using what we call the Internet NAT Gateway. So the NAT Gateway on AWS is what makes you to have access to the internet from your private subnet. Now, well, as far as VPCs are concerned, or virtual private clouds are concerned, you can connect one or two VPCs using the VPC peering connection, or you can use the transit gateways that will enable you to connect two or more VPCs. So these are some key things, and equally route tables, which helps you to manage routes between the various resources that you store in your VPC. All right, so you have route tables that you specify which resource has, or which IP address has access to your resources. So as far as networking is concerned on the AWS cloud, the very first service that should come to your mind is with the VPCs, the virtual private clouds. Well, let's dive into our AWS console and play around the AWS VPC service. We are on the AWS console, and let's dive right into VPC service. So to check out the very first service, VPC, all you need to do is to type virtual private cloud or virtual private cloud. Once you click on virtual private cloud, the first thing which you can see is the VPC, which we talk about. So you can see VPC subnets, route tables, internet gateways, egress only internet gateways. So we are going to be working on the VPC service. And for you to know more about the VPC service, or there are other networking services like I mentioned, you can have VPC lattice, transit gateway, analyzer, and so on. But well, we are focusing just on the service that is most required, or that knowledge of is required in the interview. So we'll click on the VPC, which is the main service that is often or required, or well, that need knowledge on as far as interviewing is concerned. So this is the VPC dashboard, or this is what the VPC dashboard looks like, and it lists out some of the virtual private cloud services that AWS has. And as far as virtual private cloud is concerned, we have, well, this is a summary. We have VPCs, we have subnets, route tables, internet gateways, DHCP sets, elastic IPs, endpoints, site-to-site VPNs, virtual private gateways, customer gateways, security groups, network access controllers, VPC pairings, NAT gateways. So all these are key VPC services which you should understand, right? So once you're on your, maybe you want to create a new VPC, or you need to, well, this is showing some of the VPCs that are existing, or what. Once you click on VPCs, it shows you some of the VPCs that are existing. So to create a new VPC, all you need to do is to click on create VPC. And now when creating the VPC, you can give the VPC name. So I'm going to give the name DevOps with Mike VPC. Now if you actually want to configure your VPC creation alone, or if you want to be in charge of the configuration, which is what we want to do, you choose the VPC alone. But if you want to add other components like subnets, route tables and all of that, so you can, if you take VPC and more, it's going to give you the VPC, the subnets, public subnets, private subnets. It's going to give you route tables, internet gateway, network connections and so on. So you can click on, you can equally, when creating the VPC, you can take VPC and more just to test creation of VPC with all these other components, or you can just take VPC only. Now if you take VPC only, you have to specify the IP address range of your VPC, and well, you can check out VPC side, but we're just going to give it a random range 11.0.0.0/24 or /16. That'll be the range of the VPC. And if you want it to be in a particular, well, you don't choose dedicated is for VPCs that are kind of, you have special requirements. So once you have selected just these basic things, all you need to do is to create virtual private cloud or create VPC. Now once you create the VPC, of course, you give you a successful node you have successfully created. Of course, you give you a successful node with a lot of details about the VPC. You successfully created your VPC. It gives you the ID which you can use to reference the VPC in the, well, to use in other resources or with other resources. It gives you a lot of other information about the VPC, the name and everything. So if you want to configure, like, gives you this, the siders, well, information about internet routing. And then if you want to configure logs to track how traffic is moving in between the network or in between the virtual private cloud, you can configure that using flow logs. Now once, as far as VPCs are concerned, the next thing which you can have is what we call subnet. And subnet is a smaller grouping of, like, a smaller subset of the VPC or a smaller network. You can create different networks based, or you can create subnets based on your requirements. So for you to see how subnet works, all you need to do is click on create subnet. And subnets don't exist out of a VPC, so you must select the VPC where you're creating your subnet. So we're selecting the subnet for DevOps mic VPC, and then you give details of the subnet. Maybe if you want it to be a public subnet, you call it public subnet, and then you specify if you want a particular, if you want it to be in a particular availability zone, you give a particular availability zone where you want it. But if you don't have, just allow no preference. And then now you can set up the decider block, say for example 11.0.0.0/24 for the decider block of the subnet, and then you can create a subnet. So once you click on create subnet, it's going to create, well, it might take a minute or so for you to create the subnet, and it says you've successfully created a public subnet, and it gives you some of the details which you can have or which you can use to reference the subnet. So that is how you can group networks into smaller network. You can group connections, or you can group your network into smaller networks. Now route table is basically the way which you use to route traffic between your VPC. So for you to route traffic in between that VPC which you've created, probably you need to create a route table, and creating a route table is very simple. You can still give the same name, DevOps with my route table, and then you select the VPC which you are creating a route table for, and then now you create route table. Now route tables are attached to subnets, so you see we have successfully created this route table. Now route tables are always associated to subnet, so for you to associate this route table to a subnet is pretty straightforward. You click on subnet associations, and you see that this route table is not associated to any subnet yet. So for you to do that, you just click on edit associations, and then it's going to tell you, oh, you can now attach this public subnet to that route table. So once you click on save associations, it automatically associates or adds this route table to that subnet, or like it says that you can use this route table to access resources in that subnet. Now for you to make that a particular subnet accessible to the internet, you need to configure what we call an internet gateway. Internet gateways is what gives you opportunity to connect your resources in your VPCs to the outside world. So for you to create a public subnet, you need an internet gateway, and for you to do that, you just need to click on create internet gateway. You give the name of the internet gateway, the DevOps with mic internet gateway, and then now you create internet gateway. Now internet gateways are attached to VPCs. Okay, so if you want to attach these, once you create it, they'll definitely tell you want to attach it to a particular VPC. You click on attach to VPC, and then you have to click, you select the VPC among the existing list of VPCs. So it's going to scan VPCs in your environment, and it's going to give you, so So we choose the DevOps in my VPC, so it's going to add it to that. We attach it to that VPC. Now once you attach it to the VPC, for you to configure routes now where traffic can move from your VPC, or someone can access your VPC from outside the wall, all you need to do to come to your route tables again, and then you select a particular route table. So we had created, and then you select a particular route table. So you had created a particular route table. So you all you need to do is click on this route table, click on routes. Then now you can edit routes, you can add a route to the internet. Basically you can add a route to the internet which is 0.0.0. You want to use the internet gateway which you just created, and then you want to select the particular internet gateway, DevOps my internet gateway, and then you want to save settings. That definitely means that this network which you've created, giving it access to the outside world. Now there are other key services which you should take note of as far as internet gateways is concerned. First, we have elastic IPs. Elastic IPs is one of the ways which you can use to have a static or allocate a static IP address to your resources. So if you want a particular IP address which doesn't change, you can do that by allocating an elastic IP. It's a service that costs a lot, so I will not recommend you allocating an elastic IP for a start. And then we also have endpoints, which endpoints is kind of a security level where you can use endpoints. You can create endpoints to access or to manage interconnection between some resources in the in your EC2 or in your network. So if you want to use endpoints for your AWS services, you can use that. You can use it to connect your EC2 instances and a lot more. So endpoints gives you that flexibility to connect secure connection or private DNS connection to your VPC resources. Now another very important service you should take note of is the NAT gateways. And NAT gateways basically is one of the key ways which you can use we have created a subnet, and that subnet was actually public. For you to create a subnet that is private, it means no one in the internet has access to that subnet. And now if you want to perform changes or fixes within the subnet without necessarily going to give traffic or without necessarily providing access to the subnet, you can configure a NAT gateway, and this NAT gateway is what makes a private subnet to have access to the internet. So you always want to take note of the NAT gateway. And we also have peering connections which you can use to pair or to connect one or two VPCs together. Now as far as VPCs or virtual private cloud is concerned, you also want to take note of network access control list, NACLs. Network access control list is one of the ways which you can use to control access or security into or out of your VPC. So if you want to create a particular network access control list, all you need to do is to click on create network access control list. You can give the name, say DevOps with Mike network access control list. Now you select the VPC where you want to perform VPC level security. You take DevOps with Mike, and then you create network access control list. Now what makes it unique while it's being created, what makes it unique is the fact that you can select a particular range of IPs which you don't want to have access or which you don't want to ground access to, and then you now use that. So you configure which traffic you have access to, or you configure which traffic has access into and out of your network using the inbound and outbound rules, and then you also associate it to subnets. So you should take note of network access control list. You also have security groups which you can use to secure. You can create your own security group which you can use to secure your resources, especially resources like EC2s. So the last things which I want to mention as far as virtual private cloud is concerned is transit gateways. Transit gateways, we mentioned above that you can have VPC peering for if you want to connect one or two VPCs together. With transit gateways, the transit gateway gives you the possibility of connecting two or more VPCs together, where you can have a central, in a hub and spoke model, where you can have a central hub or a central device or a central transit gateway connecting 2, 3, 4 and so on VPC. So that's another service which you should take note as far as networking is concerned. So these are some key aspects of virtual private cloud which I think you should understand.
The next networking service or content delivery network service which we have on the AWS cloud that enables you to route traffic between your resources is the AWS Route53. So Route53, AWS Route53 is a managed domain name service which AWS has for the management and resolution of your domain names on the AWS cloud. So assuming you have your resources in your AWS environment and you want resources to intercommunicate with each other, you can use a Route53 service where you'll be creating records for resources in your AWS cloud. And well, if you want to have other resources outside the AWS cloud, you can equally use a Route53 service to access domains that are outside AWS cloud. Route53 also gives you the ability to route traffic based on your user location or based on your latency requirements, or well, your fault tolerance requirements of your environment. So you can use those Route53 services that take into consideration your proximity of your users and the fault tolerance of your application, all the availability, general availability of your application. So you want to visit AWS Route53 to have an idea on how domain name resolution is done on AWS cloud.
Route53 is one of the other key services which is very much used as far as networking is concerned. And once you're on the AWS console, all you need to do is to search Route53 and you'll have access to, you see we have Route53 and they give you information on Route53. See Route53, a DNS queries or resolve DNS queries, scalable domain name registration, monitor application readiness, and all of that. So it's actually a service for domain name resolution on AWS. So if you want to know more about Route53, all you need to do is to click on Route53 and it will take you to the Route53 console where you can now configure your domain names. For example, you see you can register a domain and you can equally import a domain and all related services as far as domains are concerned. You can do that. So you can register the domain with www.devopsmike.net or www. whatever the case. You can register that domain here on Route53. So it's a very important networking service which you must have an understanding of. Now once you have your register, you can also view domains which you've registered. So once you click on that, it's going to give you, it will take you to the domains. So any domain which you've registered on AWS using this Route53, you can view this registered or you can view this Route53 domains, and all of these is a way to keep track of domains which you are currently managing and so on. Now traffic flow is another very important thing which you should take note of, because we've not viewed or we've not registered any given domain yet. There are a lot of functionalities which you cannot see yet, but now basically these traffic policies gives you a method which you can use to route traffic. I will let you visualize or create routing configurations for your traffic from the internet or from the point where somebody hits that domain www.devopsmike.net to the point where their content in an S3 bucket or in an elastic load balancer is being served. So you want to take note of these traffic policies and you want to take note of policy. So the traffic policies, for example, give you options which you can use to create traffic or which you can use to create methods in which traffic will be used to route to your resources. So if they type a given domain which I already mentioned, the traffic policy will determine which row will be used and which criteria under that row will be used and how they will be used and how they will be accessed or how your resources will be accessed. So you want to take note of some of these traffic policies and just play around them if you have a registered domain to test a lot of functionalities on Route53. And then the last thing which you should see or which you should know as far as Route53 is concerned is the policy records. Which is just basically giving you, maybe if you're using an A record or an AAA record or a CNAME record. So you also want to check out Route53 record. So this is a very basic on Route53, and I feel like you should understand Route53 before going in for your interviews.
The next networking service which we'll talk about as far as AWS cloud is concerned is the elastic load balancer. The elastic load balancer. Now, the elastic load balancer on AWS is one of the key services that helps to manage incoming traffic to your applications hosted on AWS. Well, as far as load balancers are concerned on AWS, we have the AWS classic load balancer, and then we have the application load balancer, and we equally have the network load balancer, all of which meet different requirements as far as load balancing is concerned. Now, the primary focus, or the primary reason why we want to mention load balancing, is because you can use load balancing as a method to manage or to route traffic between your resources to meet high availability and high scalability of your application. So the moment you're talking about AWS networking services, you must mention Elastic Load Balancer as an approach to manage traffic that is coming to your applications hosted on AWS Cloud. Let's get into the console so I can show a little bit around AWS Elastic Load Balancers. Now, on the AWS console, another very important service which you can use, or which you should know as far as networking is concerned, is the Elastic Load Balancer, the ELB, or load balancers generally. And load balancers basically is one of the networking services which is used to route traffic between a fleet of EC2 instances. That's why you find it under virtual servers, because if you have a fleet of EC2 instances or compute resources, you can use the load balancers for the routing of traffic between your compute resources. So once you click on load balancers, it will give you the opportunity to create a load balancer, to create load balancer technologies on AWS. As far as load balancers are concerned, you can, well, like it says, an Elastic Load Balancer scales your load balancer capacity automatically in response to incoming or changes in incoming traffic. So I mentioned load balancers are used to manage traffic in between resources, or between resources in your environment. Now, for you to put the resources together, we configure what we call target groups. The target groups is a logical grouping of a fleet of EC2 instances or compute resources that you want to be managed by your application load balancer. And when you click on create target group, for example, they are going to ask you to fill in some information. If you, like we can see here, these are some of the basic configurations for a target group. You want to maybe configure EC2 instances as targets for your load balancer, or you want to configure a given set of IP addresses as targets for your load balancer, or a given Lambda function or an application load balancer as targets for your load balancer. And also, when configuring your target groups, you want to select the VPC, so you find resources in that VPC which will be used for the configuration, and you select the ports that you'll be using for routing that traffic based on those ports. And after you've selected, for example, we want to route traffic between our compute EC2 instances, the next thing which you need to do is to register the targets, or you can give a target group name DevOps with Mike target group. Now, once you give a target group name, the next thing which you need to do is to register the target. And the target basically means, since we have selected EC2 instances, or we have selected instances as a type of targets which we want to use for our load balancer, we are now going to register. I don't have any EC2 instance running in this region. That's why we don't see any instance popping up. But if you have EC2 instances running, you can configure them as targets, and you'll be used to ensure that your load balancer routes traffic to these target instances which you specify in your target group. So that is how you can configure target groups on AWS. And once you configure your target groups, the next thing which you need to do now is to attach this target group in your load balancer creation. So when you're creating a load balancer, there are key things which you should know as far as creation of a load balancer is concerned. You can have, AWS has 3 principal type of load balancers. The very first is the application load balancer. We have the network load balancer and the gateway load balancer. So once you're going in for the interview, you also want to know more about load balancer types. Now, application load balancer basically helps you to route traffic between your application using HTTP requests, while the network load balancer is routing traffic based on the network particular or network protocol. And then the gateway load balancer can be routing traffic between resources. So you want to take note of these various load balancer types. Now, most often they use the application load balancer for configuration. So once you're building your experience, you always want to play around application load balancers. Now, once you're configuring your application load balancers, these are some key things which you must have on the basic configuration. You configure the name of the load balancer, you configure the network mapping, which network does it belong to, which VPC, which subnet, which security group, what listeners or which pod will it be listening to, and then you can configure some other additional services, and after that you create your load balancer. So this is a summary of application load balancers, and you can use them or as is, and it's a very important resource as far as networking is concerned on the AWS cloud.
Now the next networking service which you have on the AWS cloud is the AWS CloudFront. CloudFront helps you to serve your content closest to your clients. Okay, so assuming you have your resources hosted in a region, maybe in the United States, and you want to serve that same resource to clients in Europe without necessarily deploying a lot of servers in Europe, you can use what we call CloudFront distributions. So CloudFront distributions is one of the main content delivery network services which AWS has to ensure that the static application, especially static websites, they are hosted closest to your end users. And well, a lot of people use edge locations synonymous to deployments with CloudFront. So you want to check out AWS CloudFront, which we'll definitely be checking right away to know how CloudFront works, especially connecting CloudFront with a static website that is hosted on S3 or in S3 buckets. Let's dive right into CloudFront to have an idea on how CloudFront performs.
Now we'll be looking at CloudFront. CloudFront basically is a global content delivery network, CDN. So if you're going to interviews and you want to know more about CDN networks, you want to highlight your experience with CloudFront, and CloudFront gives you that possibility to deliver your content to your users. So basically we see that Amazon CloudFront is what can help you to securely deliver content with low latency and high transfer speeds. So you can use AWS CloudFront, and it comes with, of course, a different billing. You can see different use cases to deliver fast and secure websites. So especially static websites, you can deploy static websites on AWS using the CloudFront, and then you can deploy accelerated dynamic content, distributed software, game patches, or stream video live on demand. So if you're working or you are interviewing for a role where they are going to be doing live streaming and all of that, you want to highlight your experience with CloudFront or anything that has to do with static websites. You want to highlight your experience with CloudFront. Now for you to work on CloudFront, once you click on this three hamburger menu, you can see other aspects on CloudFront. You can configure telemetry, you can have reports and analytics, security, key management, savings, and all of that. So basically, to create a CloudFront, you just need to click on create CloudFront distribution. Now once you click on CloudFront distribution, you have to specify the domain or the region where this CloudFront is coming from. Maybe you have stored your static website in an S3 bucket, so you can select maybe that S3 bucket and you give the path of the S3 bucket, and then, well, this is just random. If you don't have any, you don't necessarily need to select. So this is the origin. Choose an AWS origin or enter your origins name, and then you can choose the path, and then you give the default caching behavior, what happens and how the viewer will get or how the DNS will use to resolve traffic. Is it using GET or HTTP or just HTTPS? And then you want to use different caching protocols for your configuration. And then functions basically is what will help to configure the cache behavior of your CloudFront. So this is just the basic on AWS CloudFront, and you can check out documentation on CloudFront and have a basic understanding of how AWS CloudFront operates. So understand CloudFront as one of the networking services on AWS.
Now the next networking service which you can principally measure on during your conversation as far as networking is concerned is AWS Direct Connect. AWS Direct Connect establishes a secure connection between resources on-premise and resources on your AWS cloud. So if you're wondering how you want to connect your resources on-prem, or if there is a need for you to set up a secure connection between your resources on-premise to resources on the AWS cloud, then AWS Direct Connect is that networking service which you can use. And the last service which we have for our networking is the AWS VPN. Now the VPN service is just for you to set up a secure VPN between your virtual private cloud and your resources that are hosted on-prem. So AWS gives you that possibility to set up a virtual private network, a VPN, between your resources on-prem and your resources on the AWS cloud.
Okay guys, those are security services which you should have an understanding of if you are starting your journey in cloud computing or if you are preparing for your interview. Well, there are a lot more other networking services which you can talk about on AWS, but these services you should mention are the key services which you must focus on when discussing your experience as far as networking is concerned. Again, you want to talk about AWS VPCs, you want to talk about AWS Route53, you want to talk about AWS Elastic Load Balancer, you want to talk about AWS CloudFront, you want to talk about AWS Direct Connect, and also you want to talk about AWS VPN. So share this experience, watch this video again, and have more understanding of how networking is done on the AWS cloud. See you in the next video, and if you're not yet subscribed, hit the subscribe button, like the video, share the video, and leave your comments on how I can help you to make your journey much better. See you in the next video.